right. So today we have a really great panel with us and really great things to discuss regarding what is probably on everyone's mind when it comes to the upcoming election. The fast approaching 2020 election is arguably the most important of our lifetime. Hundreds of thousands of people are already casting their ballots at amazing numbers that we've already been seeing, and millions more will follow. With this election, it's important to grapple with what's at stake. Sorry. I have a cat. I apologize for that. To grapple with what's at stake and how working people are getting empowered to make their voices heard and how we make sure the message is received. Tonight, we have an awesome panel of people taking part in this fight. We'll be speaking with Fred Redmond, who is the International Vice President of Human Affairs for the United Steelworkers based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Executive Council AFL-CIO, chairing the Task Force on Racial Justice, Board of Directors for Working America, APRI, and CBTU. We also have Reverend Scott Marks, organizing director and chair of the Black Leadership Group of Unite Here International Union, based in New Haven, Connecticut, leading a large Unite Here team in Philly to get out the vote as part of the union's Take Back 2020 effort. We also have Sandi Luckey, who is the Montana Democrats Executive Director, formerly president of the Big Sky Labor Council, AFL-CIO, for a decade, and union organizer, bringing forward Native American leadership positions, voter registration, and turnout. We also have with us Chuck Rocha, president of Solidarity Strategies, the largest Latino-owned and operated political consulting firm. He is the founder of Nuestro PAC to turn out Latinos in 2020, and former senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. His home state is Texas. We wanted to point that out. And also we have a special remarks coming a little bit later in the program from Howard Kling, who is the vice president of the International Labor Communications Association, AFL-CIO, Change to Win coordinator, AFL-CIO's Labor Journalism Project at the University of Minnesota, and longtime writer and editor at Workday Minnesota, AFL-CIO newspaper for Minnesota and North Dakota. So the way that the program's gonna go tonight is that we're going to have an hour for the panelists to answer questions that have already been given to them from myself, the moderator. So we're gonna have an hour for that. And then the last half an hour will be questions from you all who are attending this tonight, which you can ask in the chat box. So you can ask your questions in the chat box and then we'll answer from there. And then finally, we're gonna have final remarks and then and also what you can do is pay attention on the screen when it comes to some of the upcoming actions that you all can get involved in that are going on. So with that, we're gonna get started. There's no more with the translation or anything. So and I'll call on each person when time to ask. And so the first question that we have is the fact that the stakes are high as we are less than 10 days away from Election Day. What's happening in the communities you're organizing in? What are the sentiments going into election week and the concerns? And how is the organizing going to get out the vote? So I'm going to go to Fred Redmond first on our panel.
Well, thank you for the question, Chauncey, and want to express how happy I am to be here, particularly to be part of this panel. I'm sure that Reverend Meeks would agree with me that we feel as though the road to the White House is coming through Pennsylvania. And I've been focused on working in Western Pennsylvania in the Black community in areas like Homewood, the Hill District, the north side of Pittsburgh, and also East Liberty, where we've been organizing. And what I'm finding is that the Black community has a lot of enthusiasm around this election. I mean, people are motivated at the same level, if not greater, than they were in 2008. But it's a different kind of motivation. I mean, in 2008, we were able to galvanize people, particularly in the Black community, on the issue of hope and change and the prospects of electing the first Black president in the United States. And we have, in the Black community, this election have came down to a referendum on Donald Trump. And people in the Black community are viewing this president on the basis of COVID. You know, how COVID has disproportionately affected the Black community. They're looking at this president's denial that systemic racism exists in the United States. They're looking at this president's promotion of white supremacy groups. They're judging this president on the threat to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. They're judging this president on the fact that he has appointed over 200 federal judges and not one of them are African American. So we're organizing around the premise that this election is about democracy and our ability not to regress on issues pertaining to civil rights and human rights. And, you know, in this election, we're organizing around the concept that the outcome of this election will determine our ability to continue our struggle for justice in the Black community. So we see a lot of energy out there. People are voting in record numbers with the early vote. We're exceeding 2008 numbers, and the Black community is mobilized. And like I said, this election in the Black community comes down to a referendum on President Donald Trump and how he has dealt with the Black community.
Thank you, Fred. Next, we'll go to Sandi Luckey.
Thank you, Chauncey. In Montana, our community that we are working with is our Native community. We have 7 reservations and the recently federally recognized tribe of the Little Shell, who do get a reservation but have not yet identified their land. The Native vote is approximately 7% of the vote in Montana, but have traditionally lower numbers for actually registering to vote. There's some degree of distrust there that we have been working on for some time. In 2018, we ran our first really focused Native program. And just speaking on the election side of things, the focused program turned out more Native Americans to vote. And in 2018, Senator Jon Tester was running a very tight race, and the Native vote alone was the margin for the win for Senator Tester. We have run a program this year that includes, because of course, this population is suffering the pandemic more significantly than the rest of our population. So we have had to get creative and kind of throw out the old rule book about what it looks like to campaign. And we held drive-in feeds on the reservations. It's very similar to going to a drive-in movie. Our candidates were all there in person on a stage. Everybody was in a vehicle. They got food when they pulled in. We registered them to vote when they pulled in. And there's a huge screen, so they can also see the candidates on the screen. They're really high energy events. We did them all over. We also held a virtual powwow. In Indian country, you know, summer is powwow season, and they were unable to hold any powwows. So the Montana Democratic Party hosted a virtual powwow that included all of the traditional dancing and drumming, cash prizes. We had to get a little creative about how to spend political money that way, but we found a way. And in the middle of it, which is typical to an in-person powwow, our candidates were introduced to everybody that was attending. And we did a lot of get out the vote energy, and we made sure that everybody that participated and attended was registered to vote. We're now holding virtual rallies. We have increased voter registration over 2018 by 25%. The challenge now, we do have a lot of native to native selfie videos that are targeted at zip codes in Indian country, just continuing to increase the momentum and make sure that, that vote gets out. It is very challenging. We have 4 of our 7 reservations are in shelter-in-place orders, so we can't go onto the reservation to do any work. We have hired, our staff comes from the reservations, grew up on the reservations, but with the pandemic being so severe, it's just really challenging. We have more staff hired to do nothing but pick up ballots and deliver them than we have ever had. And I worry every day that it's not enough.
Thank you, Sandi. And once again, we're going to make sure that if you have questions for the attendees, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please put it in the Q&A box so it doesn't get lost in the chat. Okay, so next let's go to Reverend Scott Marks.
Good evening. I've been thinking about this for over 2 years. Our international president came to the Black Leadership Group, which I have the obligation to chair, the United States and Canada for Unite here. And basically a lot of things has happened since those plans took place. We've had the pandemic, which I call the moment of the great reveal, Black and brown people dying more than all others. And economically, the layoffs sort of match the same. But basically, the group having the experience of dealing with tough times, we mounted up for the challenge. And that challenge was, were we gonna have good ideas, but good ideas without boots, without organizing, without development, without people ready to get on the ground and to do what needed to be done, is the thing that we considered. Unite here never blinked. We got with the safety experts and figured out a way how we had protocols to keep people safe. And so I also serve on the national across the country in the battleground states that we are. And what we're doing in Nevada, we actually are in Las Vegas and in Reno. We're also in Arizona, the city of Phoenix. We've been there since July and been able to keep people safe. And we're also in Florida, in Orlando and in Miami. And we're knocking on doors, and we have the PPE, we have the protections, and basically our union got devastated in the midst of this pandemic. The casinos, the hotels, all the places that you go when things are normal, those folks were home and took a big blow after there was no new package put together. And those same folks took that blow, and they're on their feet in those cities, and they're knocking on doors. And we didn't know in the last hour that we were gonna pick up Pennsylvania. And we're in Philly, and we're in the low propensity voters. Some of the yearly incomes are 14,000. And it's the largest, blackest, poorest city in the country. And there are we started off with a real push on everything that we were gonna do to stay safe from the pandemic. But in the midst of it, I had some of our New Haven team that's on the ground in Philly. We came up with a set of rules and to-dos and don'ts as it relates to the violence that are in those communities. Within 10 feet, candidates are ducking and dodging bullets, but people recognize the reason that we're in those neighborhoods. That is where our people are. And we have to go where our people are. And basically across the sort of nation in terms of the overall voter ID, door knocks, and Biden's, we are actually at our goal. And the goal for Philly, for example, was 100,000 to election day. And we have surpassed that and started on our second round. The people are charged up, they're pumped up, and they're ready to fight. And when we fight and when we vote, we win.
Thank you very much. That's super exciting. Next we have Chuck Rocha.
Thank you so much, Chauncey. It's so good to be with you and the full team here. And it's so good to see my old friend, Fred. I've been doing this for 31 years, and y'all should all know up front that if it wasn't for Fred Redmond, I probably wouldn't be here as a young man of color coming up in the labor movement. I've been so blessed to do this organizing be an author, be a New York Times contributor, run this consulting firm. But this is just a great reminder that it's part of our job to reach back and reach around and make sure we're bringing as many people that look like all of us, representing diverse communities, with us to what we're doing. I've been so honored to work so much in the Latino community over the last few months and years and through many cycles. What I've seen now is something I've never really seen before, which is this crazy president of ours almost being the best GOTV director that I've ever seen in any organizing campaign that I've ever worked in. It's just off the charts of what we're seeing. I was pulling up some numbers earlier today for a TV program I was on. Let me read this to you. So far right now in 2020, 1 million new Latinos have early voted that did not participate in the 2016 election. And let me take that a step further. If you're talking about Latinos between the ages of 18 and 30, those young kids like my son in Pittsburgh right now, normally we say, they don't vote. We don't need to spend no time on them. We're not going to do that work. Well, guess what? They ain't listening to us and they're showing up. In 2016, only 132,000 Latinos early voted up until this point. Right now, 673,000, 400 times as many Latinos, young Latinos, 18 to 30, have showed up and voted. And you want to know why? Because there's anxiety in our community. There's worry in our community. Latinos are dying at 3 times the rate from COVID. Our children are 8 times as likely to catch the disease, all depending on what you hear from the CDC. And you see us be called essential workers, right? You hear that mixed status families, when they pass relief in the US Congress, we don't even get a check because I'm married to a DACA recipient, because I'm married to a TPS recipient. I'm less American than my neighbor. This is the anxiety that we're feeling. At the same time, we're watching Black Lives Matter in the streets. We're watching policemen kill unarmed men. We're watching losing jobs, losing healthcare. When I left the Bernie campaign after we wrapped it up at the end of the spring, I created Nuestro PAC. It's the largest Latino super PAC in America. I've been so honored and so blessed again to raise almost $10 million into our super PAC. And we've been talking to Latinos early and often and in language, showing up in their neighborhoods, on their cell phones, on their computers, on their television. What I'm getting at there is what we call a multi-layered communication strategy. And it's that strategy of the organizing that I learned in Local 746 back in Tyler, Texas, where you show up in a community with your hat in your hand, you talk to them about what are their concerns, you listen, and then you tell them what you're going to do to make their lives better. That's what we're doing right now. And that's why Nuestro PAC, in coalition with lots of other people, are not sitting back in this election. We're going to continue to push until we beat Donald Trump.
Awesome. All of you are like getting us revved up already. It's like the first question. And I'm like, wow, let's go out right now. Okay. So the second question that we have is, in recent weeks, we've seen an emboldening of hate, right? Many of you touched upon that, of hate and voter intimidation from the Trump administration. This has sparked white supremacist domestic terrorist groups and individuals believing in that ideology to attempt to carry out violence and voter intimidation. This is coupled with a right-wing push to call into question the legitimacy of the elections during this global pandemic. How do we ensure safety at the polls while showing voters that their voices will be heard? So let's go back to Fred on that.
First of all, Chauncey, that's an excellent question. When we talk about the legitimacy of the election, I want to remind people that this democracy is over 230 years old. And this president has given the right-wing Republican Party 3 Supreme Court judges. Okay, so, we have to ask ourselves, is this Republican Party is going to sacrifice the issue of democracy, okay, by killing democracy and taking a stand and die on what we call on a Trump Hill, okay? I believe in democracy. And I believe that even a right-wing Supreme Court, okay, is not going to sacrifice democracy, the tenets of our society, to save this guy. Now, I believe that. Now, the reality is on election day, and I say this in all due respect, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist or trying to excite anything, but this isn't the 50s and the 60s where we had a very, very strong movement towards civil and human rights, and it was a movement toward justice. Okay, we're going to be at the polls. You know, we're galvanizing people to be at the polls. You know, to make sure that people is not intimidated, whatever that means. Okay, but people is committed toward the concept of, you know, one citizen, one vote. People are committed to the concept of democracy. Okay. And, you know, we all hope that the election runs as smooth as could be expected, even though, you know, the threats of this president about the election and, you know, if he loses, we know he's going to, you know, say everything was rigged. But the question must be, we have to hold this Republican Party and the Supreme Court on the tenets of democracy. Okay, and if they want to down Trump Hill, then we're ready to have that fight if it becomes necessary.
Great.
And when I say we, I'm talking about the labor movement. I'm talking about progressives. I want to clarify that, okay? And people who believe in the concept of democracy is ready to have this fight.
Yes. Thank you, Fred. Before we go on to the next panelist, we're going to have Rosanna get on one more time because we want to make sure everyone's able to listen in on this discussion. We do have an announcement regarding the translation one more time.
Yes, we do have a person who needs translation. Cruz Susana, si puede cambiar, buscar donde está el mundo, ahí puede cambiar su icono, el icono del mundo, puede cambiarlo a español y ahí está una compañera que va a poder darle a la traducción. Si tiene alguna otra pregunta, pónganlo en el chat y yo le puedo contestar. Gracias.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to go to Sandi on the question.
Thank you. So the question of how are we going to keep people safe at the polls and make sure that their voices are heard? Number one, we're going to encourage them to vote by mail. Like at all costs, as much as we can get in, we're going to encourage voting by mail. In Montana, we have 150,000 more ballots in on this day in the election cycle than we had in 2018. And of course, 2018 was a high watermark for us. So we're going to encourage people to vote by mail. Second, we're going to encourage them to vote early in person so that we don't have as many people voting on election day and that any challenges on election day at any of those polling places impact the smallest number of voters. And then the third is that we have a voter protection team. We have 280 volunteers across the state observing and poll watching in every county. We have dozens of attorneys. We have a communications system so that anything that happens in any polling place in the state will instantaneously be known by every person that works in that operation. So if we're seeing activities happen in multiple counties, we'll be positioned to respond to them promptly. We have have built over the months relationships with the elections administrators and with the county commissioners. And we'll use those relationships to make sure that every voice gets heard via that ballot.
Thank you. Reverend Scott Marks. Sorry, just unmute for a second, Reverend. Thank you.
All right. I was looking at the Ocoee massacre that happened in 1920, where on election day, it's the most violence ever on election day still to date, and was killed by a white mob. Homes were burned. And years to come later, the cross burnings and the Ku Klux Klans and all the things to deter us from actually doing what it is that we have to do. I oftentimes have the audience with Reverend Jim Lawson, who's in LA and was invited king to Memphis. And basically, and the late Congressman Lewis saying that we need to find good trouble. And basically, I think about bringing our love, our truth, and our power. I'm deputizing everyone on this sort of event and everywhere I go, that we're going to do what we've done to get to where we are now, is to be there and protect each other and use the power of what's right in order to get through this. The Poor People's Campaign have over 2,500 people already in the early voting sites that will actually roll into election day in 10 states. I know the AFL is like recruiting, because they're recruiting from Unite here to actually have poll watchers. And not only that, I think that on election day, Trump has already laid out this plan that win or lose, he's going to try to pull it back. And so the thing is that we have plans working with the Movement for Black Lives and other organizations. And oftentimes the labor movement, sometimes we come in with the way that we come in, but we want to make sure that we come in as partners, as teams, and basically on the 4th, on the 5th, on the 6th, even on Saturday, culminating in DC if need be. We have people out doing all that they can. And the best thing that we have is each other. And I believe with the numbers that are coming in right now, that people have found the reason for actually voting, not just to cast that vote, but our fight for our lives and our democracy. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it. And I'm not balling up my fists, but I'm building up my love and my peace and my power to actually not have, the sort of outcome that they're looking for. And yes, we will win.
Thank you, Reverend. Chuck Rocha.
Thank you, Chauncey. I think it's a great question. And for those of you who got a lot of gray in your beard like me, you know that this disinformation ain't something new. Now, what's new is the internet and the power of being able to share it. I was thinking back to, it was 1996, and I sent down to Galveston, Texas, and the Republicans would drive around in their pickup trucks and they'd print newspapers with the wrong election dates on it, and they'd throw it in black and brown people's yards because there was no internet back then. And that was their voter suppression, was to try to tell our people not to vote. And if you vote on the wrong day. So what's really happened is that's been put on steroids with what you're seeing with social media. And what we're doing with Nuestro PAC and the larger independent expenditure Latino table that I help coordinate for all the movement is we're getting information out there in Spanish, because what we're seeing is most of this disinformation and intimidation are going to people you can intimidate who've never voted before. People don't realize, but Latino voters on average are 10 years younger than the average voter. So a black and white voter are 10 years older on average than a brown voter, just because we're a newer immigrant community. And a lot of the fathers and mothers and grandfathers couldn't vote because they weren't citizens. They became naturalized citizens. So their children are the first real US citizens. So talking in Spanish and English in community, on radio channels, making sure you're getting into the churches and places to spread the community on the disinformation from people that they trust. Right. So we're guiding people to the government website, to the county website, where they know it's an official website and official information from their state or county or municipality. And I think that is something that is helping. What you also need to understand, for folks who aren't that familiar with our community, is that lots of us immigrate here from countries where even the government itself is corrupt. So they're like, you mean that government, and who already ain't speaking for me, who's already given tax cuts to the rich, who already won't give me $15 minimum wage, who already says that healthcare is not a right. So we got to get there with these people, but it takes long-term investment. And the last thing I'll say is, it's not something we should be worried about a week or 2 weeks only before the election. It's something that should be ongoing, systematic education every time a young Latino turns 18 in language, having that conversation to let them know, look, you're going to hear a lot of junk on the internet. You're going to hear a lot of junk from your friends, and sometimes maybe even from that crazy uncle of yours, the one you don't talk to that often. Well, you know he's crazy. You shouldn't be taking voting advice from him. So that's what we're doing out there in the community, is trying to dispel some of this in language.
Awesome. Thank you. At this time, we're going to take special remarks from Howard Kling, who is also dealing with, the voter intimidation issue that's going on out there in Minnesota. Howard?
There, I had to unmute myself. Sorry. So I totally want to echo what everyone said so far, and throw in that Minnesota's absentee ballots at this point are up 370% from 2016 and 18. Over 1,200,000 people have sent them in. And I want to point out that they are counted in Minnesota as they arrive. So there's none of this waiting till election day to count them, which points to one thing that nobody has mentioned. I mean, just some of the fundamentals that were fought over and won here and are also part of tradition, like having early voting and some defense of that when the ballots actually how late they can be sent in and or rather accepted, which is currently 10 days after election day. I know that there was a lawsuit there. Just actually no one's mentioned, but making sure that election places, whether they're early voting or going to be, day of voting, are COVID safe, is something that I think people have made sure and also publicized. One of the things, though, I do want, and then there's been some stuff in Minnesota about counting the right-wing attempts to intimidate voters on election day. There was a suit brought by Attorney General Keith Ellison, a great guy, against Atlas Aegis, who was recruiting private security folks out of the military and others to come into Minnesota and disrupt, election polling places, and got assurances that that will not happen. So some of those fundamentals early on in fighting have been ways, and people know about this. And also just, echo everything everyone said, just like assuring people, getting them out to vote, ensuring them we've got their back. There's people, we're ready, and so on, if something were to happen or if something does happen. And I want to just finally get to out of the, I think maybe the most important thing, because we don't know what's going to happen nationally or even locally after the election. And out of the George Floyd protests, there are different lanes, different groups, coalitions that have developed to essentially stop the coup. That's what they talk about. And there are Take Action Minnesota, which is a electoral coalition comprised of 11 unions and 9 justice organizations, is going to have a call. The plans are just being made now. People are focused on, of course, getting the vote out and all that, but there'll be a call soon to discuss, kind of gearing up for what might happen and putting in place communications and so on to make sure that all votes are counted in Minnesota. Other organizations like SETUL, which is Center for Workers United in Struggle, and since I'm terrible at Spanish, I'm not going to kill it, but SETUL, as well as other organizations in the community, are working on direct action plans post-election. There's a coalition called Tending the Soil, which is a completely POC-led coalition of working class communities that includes, again, SETUL, SEIU Local 26, AWOOD, another worker center in Minnesota focused mostly on the East African community. And they will be leading a march called Together We Rise, claiming democracy and sort of continuing some of the issues that came out of the police murder of George Floyd, and going forward. So, and then, the AFL itself, had a call here in Minnesota, I know recently, be ready for action and mobilization. So I just, no one's mentioned this, but I just thought I'd point out that there are people actually planning here in Minnesota anyway, what to do, hopefully nothing, but what to do if the vote's being stolen and there are threats to our democracy, on November 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so on. So, whoop. I just hit my computer, so I fell off the.
Thank you, Howard. That's great. Okay, so the next question is, let's assume that everything goes right come election day. Trump is voted out of office, many progressive candidates are voted in, and a transition of power happens peacefully. How do we make sure that the issues of the campaign, such as healthcare, workers' rights, the environment, et cetera, are fulfilled? What's the plan to keep the pressure on? So let's go back to Fred on that.
Well, one thing that I have learned throughout the many years that I've been involved in the labor movement, and a good example is the great work that Chuck Rocha is doing in the Latino community, is power buys you a seat at the table. And we all know Joe Biden, and the labor movement was all over the place during the primary campaigns. You know, we had a lot of support for Bernie Sanders, other folks. Biden had support from some unions. But at the end of the day, the labor movement have coalesced around Joe Biden. And we are united as a movement. And like I said, we know Joe. And Joe Biden has committed to make sure that labor is at the table, okay, to push the agenda that he's talking about on the campaign trail that was help crafted by organized labor. When we're talking about, you know, issues like healthcare, when we're talking about the environment, and we're talking about trade, and we're talking about issues that supporting the working people, Joe Biden made those, took those positions in consultation with organized labor. So I feel confident that if everything goes well, and Joe Biden is elected as the 46th president of the United States, is that our voices are going to be heard. We're not going to be ignored. We will have a Secretary of Labor, whoever that is, who is not afraid to say the word union, okay? And I think that we will be able to influence the agenda going forward, because Joe Biden has committed to be the most labor-friendly president in the history of the United States. And Joe Biden is a man of integrity, of character, and if everything goes right, then, you know, we expect to have a seat at the table. Not to say that we're going to agree on everything, but to have the opportunity to make sure our voices are heard.
Great, thank you. Sandi?
Well, I'm going to use my skills as a union organizer and make a permanent space for Native voices inside the structure of the party. The way a state party is well, at least the way the Montana Democratic Party is structured, is that we have local Democratic Central Committees based on the geography of a county. So we have 56 counties, we've got 56 Democratic Central Committees, and then we have the state party structure. Where those central committees overlap reservations, we are not attracting Native Americans to serve in those roles. So we are going to give them a space to gather and engage as Native Democrats in a way that is true to their culture. And we are creating tribal committees. There'll be one for each reservation, so 7 plus our little shell, who will get their land identified. So we'll actually have 8 tribal committees across the state of Montana. That's never been done before. And we're planning a leadership development series to bring those new leaders through a process to, bring them together with our existing county central committees so they can work on combined issues, partner together, and become kind of a fast track to be effective at running campaigns and talking about issues and being engaged in the legislative session, which happens just a couple of months after this election for us. So there's no time like the present to get moving on this. But we will go to our rules convention next year, and we will seek 2 votes at our state convention for each one of these tribal committees. If we succeed at doing that, and we will, Native Americans will have truly representative voting strength in the Montana Democratic Party. Those tribal committee votes alone will represent 7% of our state convention votes. The Native Americans are 7% of our population. So we are going to make the long-term investment. We're going to give them a space. We're going to give them a platform, and we're going to work together to drive more of the issues and more of the solutions that are needed in Indian country.
Thank you, Sandi. Reverend Marks? Reverend Marks?
The one thing that we will gain on election day, Joe Biden becomes the president, is the opportunity to continue to do what we did in order to get him elected. We're going to have to fight, build, organize. I remember other election days when Democrats got in and everything went well. And I'm in Pennsylvania knocking on doors, and I'm telling you, the sort of quality of life there is not changed. And so basically we gained the opportunity to continue to build committee, to actually talk to people. I think the reason that we got Trump, because the committee is not large enough and we're not talking to enough people and pushing people to move their feet on what they believe in. And so I don't relax on the 3rd. Everything goes well. I know that we're going to have to continue to push and continue to pound. The haves have gotten richer during the pandemic. They look for all types of ways to take advantage when poor people are down. But if there was ever a time in history for us to stand up against what's happening in this country at the White House, and then when the White House changed, we still need to stand up to demand that working people, that our environment, and some folks, try to clone the environment as a white people thing. But the people that suffer the most, you see what happened in Puerto Rico, you see what happened in New Orleans, the asthma, all the rates, the underlying issues. If we don't fix these things, and it's going to take a real driving force because wealthy people has invested in politics on both sides, we have to fight.
Reverend Chuck?
Thank you, Chauncey. I think it's a great question. I think it's the question on everybody's mind. We're going to win a lot of elections on November 3rd. How many is still yet to be seen? But let me, I don't want to throw any water on this, but let me be clear about two things. And I've learned over a long history and even some of these scars on my face. It's that politicians, no matter if you love them or you hate them, they really only care about two things. They care about money and they care about votes. And that's your liberal politicians, your conservative politicians, and your moderate politicians. They care about money and votes. Now, if you mess with either one of them, then you get their attention and maybe we'll vote that way. But let me go deeper there, because I think the things that every panelist have talked about is leading to one of those two things, affecting their money or affecting their votes by mobilizing people to vote them out. But we have such a unique time in history. If you think about this right now, every 10 years we have a census. So every congressman, every congresswoman will be running in a new congressional district in 2022. There's something else phenomenal happening. You're starting to see primary candidates from the left, primary safe Democrats who really haven't worked that hard in their districts. You get the AOCs of the world, you get the Cori Bush of the world. You're getting more and more people from the left. So that what that does is it gets a politician's attention. That gives Fred Redmond and the Steelworkers more ability to have more pressure than just money and votes that the Steelworkers can deliver. Because now they can say, if you don't be with me, us, our membership, then we'll run a steelworker, we'll run somebody from labor, we'll run a black man, a brown woman against you in your primary and teach you a lesson. You've already seen the lessons happen before. And so whether you're Native American, whether you're any movement out there that or any of these communities now can come together and put that pressure on people, particularly right now, because they're going to be running in districts where they probably didn't represent all of the people there. And if they were in a safe district, they weren't spending any money to actually mobilize anybody anyway, because they kind of already automatically get elected. So we have a very unique time in history and a very unique time of this happening to kind of all weigh in and do that piece. And I'll also say this, is that this youth turnout, all of this great turnout, everybody in all Democratic politics, all these woke white consultants, all these folks are going to think they figured out the new way to bake a muffin, right? Well, they don't know nothing about it. They were just standing around eating the muffins. They didn't have nothing to do with baking them. right? So we all have to stand up and go, no, 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 that was me, the Latinos. No, 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 that was me, the steelworkers. No, no, that was us, the Native Americans. No, that was us working in this. This was this. And we need to own that. We need to claim that space. We need to take that seat. As Fred said earlier, that's our seat at that table. And it's more than just a seat. People are like, why did Bernie Sanders do so well with Latino vote? Chuck, do you have a real big Latino vote department? No, we didn't have a Latino department. It was because Chuck Rocha was running the entire campaign. And I empower Black people and brown people and women. This is the kind of, not just having a voice, not just having a seat, but it's our time to actually run the meeting.
Okay, so my final question to you all is, okay, this is the opposite. Now, let's assume things don't go right on election day. What's the contingency plan then in moving forward? So let's go to Fred on that.
Well, real quick, look, in 1961, Dr. King spoke at the AFL-CIO convention in Belle Harbor, Florida. And Dr. King declared that the two greatest movements for social and economic justice is the civil rights movement and the labor movement. In 1963, Dr. King called George Meany on the phone and asked for support for the Poor People's Campaign. George Meany could not get a recommendation from the Executive Council of the AFL-CIO to support the Poor People's Campaign. And one thing that this president has done, he's brought us all together. Labor, civil rights, the religious community, we are unified in this effort to defeat this president. So if we lose, what we must do is keep this coalition together. We have to keep this coalition together going forward. I've been, asked to chair a racial task force on behalf of the National AFL-CIO. And we're talking about aspects, we're putting together an agenda that we're going to put forward regardless of who wins the presidency. And we're talking about issues like reimagining state and state feds and central labor councils. How do we better work with the communities? What role do community groups play in the labor movement on the local level? We're talking about a blueprint constructed by unionized law enforcement officers in terms of police reform. Okay, so I'm mentioning some of these things to say that if we lose our determination for social and economic justice and the cohesiveness, okay, that the destruction of this president has brought on, has brought us all together. We have to continue this effort. We have to work with all of our allies and community partners in the labor movement and push our agenda forward.
Thank you. Sandi?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're going to have to band together where we are already formed in coalitions, and we're going to have to build new relationships everywhere that we can. For us in Montana, well, no, not necessarily just for us in Montana. Let me just say, it took Republicans decades to get us into this mess. It took them decades, and they planned for it, and they ran communications to twist people's minds about what's true and what isn't. And it may very well take us longer than one election to climb back out. And we're going to have to be in that for the long haul. It's not a battle we can abandon. We're going to have to build relationships everywhere we can. Of course, we work with the labor movement, and on some of the leadership development series work that we're going to do, we're going to partner with our labor unions because it's going to help them bring their Native union members into leadership roles as well. But we're also running a rural program, and we'll continue, much like the Native program. It's not going to stop because an election year is over. We're going to run it in an off year, and we're going to run it every year, and we're going to be consistent, and we're going to build that relationship, and we're going to build that strength. And we have to do the same in our rural program, in rural communities. Republicans have been talking for decades, and in a lot of ways, I kind of think that, there isn't as much union membership there. I think in a lot of ways as Democrats, we stop talking in those circles. So we're not even in the conversation. The only thing they have to listen to is what Republicans offer. So we need to change that too. And we need to change that not just in election year, so that we can make these elected officials and their values better reflect our population.
Reverend Marks?
Yes, I definitely agree, Fred. I like the sound of that. We got to keep this movement moving. And basically, I think the contingency plan has already started with what's happening with our young folks taking the streets, all races, all colors, and basically are rising to a special moment that we're in. I'm excited about what is happening there. I'm believing that the labor movement, and I try to play the best role that I can, that we actually have the labor movement, but all these other movements that an infusion of organizing, that we come together to keep pushing for the things that we need. In my local role as a Connecticut political director, and that very thing that I just heard said on this phone, in our municipality, we started to elect the janitors and the cooks and the people who work at Yale that were in Unite here, and grew to a super majority and got rid of the sort of structure where everything was coming down to us building up the Communist Party, the young people that are working, like bringing those groups together in over more now than 10 or 15 years, starting to build. The key thing is to build, but also to train and develop. I like to use the word organize. So whatever the outcome is, I think on the 3rd, that is the day that we actually begin. Yes, Donald Trump has done a good job of organizing and bringing us all together. I knew it the day when he won. And basically, the time is now for us to not turn back, or not to accept the pushback that's coming on us, but how are we going to actually build, and then also open up the tent, right? Not be siloed off into our different sections, this group here, that group there, but try to build in a way that we're going to actually continue to fight for the freedom that we're on the ground for now in these different states where we could actually make a difference. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Chuck?
I think win, lose, or draw, I'm gonna make a bold statement and say that we have to completely change the way we're running campaigns. Like I said, if we win, folks are going to take a lot of credit for work that just did not work. And if we lose, and allude to the point you're making, it will just exacerbate. I don't even really know what that means, but it sounds good. It makes it more important that we change. And I don't want to say burn everything down, because that sounds too mean or hostile or dangerous, but we do. And let me make my point. I'm the senior most political operative in the nation who's a person of color. I operate in white spaces. Everybody who runs campaigns at my level are all white women or white men. And let me make that case even more. There are 12 Senate races in America right now that are targeted that we could flip. 6 people that are in those targeted races are people of color. There's Black men running for the Senate in Mississippi and in South Carolina. There's Native American woman running. There's one thing that all 12 of those Senate races have in common. You know what they are? They're managed by a white woman or a white man. You mean to tell me you can't find a Black campaign manager in Mississippi or Alabama? No, you can't. If you continue to run the same operation you've always run, that Democrats have always run since 1992, when I worked on my very first race in Tyler, Texas for Governor Ann Richards. Now, that don't mean that I hate white people. I love white people. My mama's white. I'm saying that it's time to diversify the way that we run campaigns, because you still have a great small number of political consultants who run every aspect of this. I get to look behind the scenes of every campaign. There's a lot of pundits on TV and folks working in the communities. You don't get to be in the meetings I'm in. Every meeting I'm in where there's more than $100 million involved, a white man or a white woman's got his hands on it. The diversity ends in our movement where the money begins. And this is going to be my dying legacy, is to open up this work for more Black and brown, Asian, gay, folks who just ain't white, male or female. Again, that means that we are doing organizing wrong in campaigns. We still are spending gazillions of dollars on TV, which you should do TV. And let me make this case one more way. There's been $1 billion spent on independent expenditures talking to white persuadable voters that have been raised just amongst the top 10 super PACs. You know who they are. They're spending a lot of money on your TV right now, but $1 billion with a B dollars spent over that same time period, just the top 3 Latino super PACs. And let me be clear that my PAC, Nuestro PAC, is the biggest of those, and we've raised just over $9 million. But us combined have not raised but $15 million to talk to every Latino in America. That's $1 billion compared to $13 million. And then they want to look at us and step into our community and go, Chuck, I don't know why them Latinos just decide not to vote. Well, it would help if you spent the same resources. Now, is it smart to spend $1 billion to persuade white people to vote for Joe Biden? Absolutely. That's why they're spending that much money, because it is smart and good and sound strategy if you're doing a multi-layered approach. But we need to systematically change the way that we're running Democratic campaigns, not just less white people. I use that as just an example, but putting people in campaigns like I talked about, where we don't, to the Reverend's point, silo people off, give them no budget, give them no authority, and give them no sense of the overall strategy, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is us, the people on this call. That's been so refreshing for me to hear and see all of your faces. That's what I'm fighting for, because if I'm going to be that person, I'm going to make space for everybody else.
Thank you.
I gotta say amen. I gotta say amen.
Amen.
To that. One of the features that happened in this race, every aspect of any campaign that unite here in, we got Black people leading in some way, and the scale that we just heard about, I just couldn't hold my peace on that one.
No, you feel free, because that is very true. Okay, so those were from the moderator question, me. My questions to you all, and now we want to open it up for the attendees. You know, we have a great number of people who have come tonight to listen to you all speak and hear your words. So we want to go to CJ, who is helping out, who's also on the editorial board of the People's World, who's helping out with the questions. So we're going to give it to CJ to let us know what questions we have in the Q&A.
All right, we've gotten a lot of questions so far, and I'll try to just group them into a few that are similar. So I'll throw the first one to you, Chauncey. Trump is doing two things at the same time. He's inciting racism against African Americans and people of color, while also running advertisements bragging about his achievements for the Black community, the Latino community, while also denouncing Biden for supporting criminal justice legislation in the 90s. So the question that someone wants to know from the panelists, do you see that this sort of two-edged campaign is having any effect among voters in those communities that it's targeting?
Okay, so let's go to, we could just go through each person, and if you want to give a few words on it, I'll switch it up. I'll start at the other end, and so it's equal. Chuck, you want to answer to that?
Sure. Let me give this quick answer. I think that, yes. Is it important for Trump to do it? If I'm going to call out the bad, I'm going to call out the good. And Donald Trump has been brilliant. And I can't believe I'm going to use these words, but it's just the fact, to spend millions and millions of dollars in Spanish to talk to Latinos. You know what you get if you're Donald Trump? The most racist, anti-immigrant, got babies in cages idiot in the White House, is you get to skew off 1 point here, 3 points here, 4 points here. That's why you see Joe Biden's numbers weak with Latinos. It's not because Donald Trump is better than Joe Biden. It's because Donald Trump spent $1.5 million in June and July on Spanish language TV, while Joe Biden was dark on TV. You only get one chance to make a first impression. And Donald Trump's advertisement wasn't saying he was the second coming of Cesar Chavez. He was saying how bad Joe Biden was for the Latino community and just lying. but that's fine. An old buddy of mine said, if you lie long enough about having a horse, eventually somebody will buy you a saddle. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. And so he's doing the same thing specifically with African-American men and Latino men. You know, he's playing up this machismo thing and this manly thing and all of that, not trying to win a majority of either one, but at least spending the resources to shave off a few points in Pennsylvania, a few points in Florida, a few points in Arizona, because that's the only way he can win, because he's losing now the older white vote at a much higher percentage. So he's looking at opportunities to make that up somewhere else.
Reverend Marks?
No, I definitely agree. I think Chuck said it well. And those folks those advertisements are reaching out, they're in our organizations, they're in our families. And the conversation and the push about what is actually going on. And this particular campaign, which I think is going to be one of the most important in our history, has drawn a lot of attention and first-time voters. And so we got to push, because every day in Pennsylvania is election day. The polls are open, but actually reaching out to people and spreading the real news about what's really going on, so that we actually don't give over to the nonsense.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say real briefly, I'm sorry, regarding that question, I was listening to Reverend Marks and Chuck, and I think they hit it right on the head. As far as look, the black community, look, the 20 black people that got out of jail on this criminal justice bill, I'm sure they appreciate it. And the $10 million that he spent to finance approximately anywhere between 90 and 100 black business, small black business people, I'm sure they appreciate it. Our community is hurting. And the resources have not been put in from this administration to improve life of everyday black people. And black people is going to the polls in numbers, and they're going to vote overwhelmingly against this president. So I don't think it's having too much effect in the black community.
Sandi?
I don't think I can improve upon what's been spoken.
Great, thank you. Next question, CJ?
Yeah, this next question, several people asked some variation of this one. Under the possibility that Trump refuses to leave office or tries to dispute the results, there are big sections of AFL-CIO, Central Labor Councils, I know Rochester was one of them, about the need for massive strikes as a tool to force a transition, a peaceful transition of power, and even a general strike. So people were asking what the panelists' thoughts are on that topic.
Okay. Start with Sandi.
Well, the fact of the matter is that our union contracts don't allow for strikes that occur while a contract term is in place. So, I mean, a legitimate strike of walking out of work is going to be a violation of an agreement in probably most cases across the country. In terms of a general strike, I kind of think that, when Biden is elected, I think that the cameras will turn and the cameras will be on Biden, and Biden will lead us forward in a rational way. And, Trump can bluster all he wants to. The cameras will be on Biden. There's no option for a transition not to take place. So I think he can make whatever threats he wants to. Our country allows for one pathway, and the attention will be on the president. Should we get to a place where we need to hit the streets? I'm not sure there's ever been anything more powerful than when all Americans from all places and all backgrounds hit the streets. I do hope that we're not required to do that to see our democracy move forward. Interested in what the other panelists have to say on that.
And I'll just, because, maybe not each person wants to, but whoever else wants to speak on this, and Howard included, because we still have Howard with us, if you want to jump in on that as well. So,
thing I'll say is that
yes, Reverend?
I'll go after.
we are planning. We're planning to hit the street. We've been on the street, and it's a difficult, unsafe time to be on the street. Thank God for our safety protocols that we have in place. We've been there since July. The deal is, and in Phoenix, Nevada, those hot, long days, we're prepared to fight the day of, the day after, all the way to the inauguration to make sure. And there, people are already in the practice to be in the street. We've had the uprising with the movement for Black Lives, and all of our white, Latinx, all of our family, Native American, you name them, they're hitting the streets. And so the deal is, we figured out how to do that in a safe way. We actually need to be safe, but I'm definitely organizing all of my committees to be prepared to hit the streets and actually do it in a way that we're going to actually get on the right track to get our country back.
Okay. Howard, you said you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm going to be outrageous here. If Trump wins, or he's able to steal the election, it's a five alarm fire. I want to echo what Chuck said, what Sandi has been doing. The first American Republic is over if this happens. I just want to say that. And we have to rebuild something new, and it will be a challenge none of us has ever seen. We might have dreamt it, but we've never seen it before. And it's going to have to be along the lines of Chuck's. It can't be a bunch of white people doing it. It's got to be truly intersectional. We either are at this place where this is a reformable country, and this election probably tells us where we can fix things more slowly or whatever, too slow, or it's over and we have to build something new. And I think that's going to be a challenge for labor. We all have to figure out how to do that in an emergency, because Trump has shown us what he's going to do, because he's done some of it already.
Yeah.
Well, look, I agree with everything everybody said. If democracy is threatened, and if Trump steals the election, so to speak, the labor movement, along with every other social justice movement, every movement for democracy, any people of fairness who stand for democracy, there's going to be a strong response. And at this point, we can't say what their response will be, but there will be an organizing response if the democracy of this country is thrown into a turmoil.
We win. If we don't get it, we got to shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
Reverend Chuck, did you want to say anything?
I think everybody did a great job.
Okay. All right, TJ, the next question.
The next one follows on, I think, some of the remarks that Reverend Scott Marks was making. An attendee asks, are you seeing an increase in participation among the wider faith community in get out the vote efforts? I guess, you just talked about the ones in your community, but they're asking, are you seeing that in other places across the country?
They're definitely the larger denominations. They have sort of different ways that they're getting involved. But I can't make up what is not. Basically, there was a history. Every Sunday there would be a meeting when we were pushing in the civil rights movement, or when it was vote time, and basically somehow there has been some straying away. In some communities it's happening, but I would love to see it happen in a much better fashion when we start talking about taking control of the rights to people's body and what they do with it, and people get, crossed up in so many different ways and overlook the poor conditions of our schools, the sort of environmental impacts that are happening at this time, how people are doing this tremendous work and then held up as frontline workers, but making the lowest pay. So the thing is that I just believe that we can have a strong push. And if you belong to a faith institution, you ought to be sticking your finger up on Zoom if you're not back in church, saying, how are we involved? And let's make it happen, because I do believe this is God's work.
Yeah. CJ?
All right. Next question. Almost none of the candidates running for the White House and too few for Congress say anything about the $1 trillion plus votes in Congress, which the president signs for military spending every year. How do we put pressure on Congress and the president, no matter who's elected, to cut the military budget and move the money to some of the human needs that we've been talking about?
Thank you. Who would like to speak to that?
I would just say that I think it goes back to power, which is money and votes. I think that any of us who've been around for more than 10 minutes knows that the industrial military complex got a lot of money. And guess who they give a lot of money to? They give a lot of money to your elected officials. And guess what that money is? That's nonpartisan money. They give a lot of money to the Democrats. They give a lot of money to the Republicans. A lot of these politicians take all of that defense money. And so it makes it harder. I don't make it impossible, but it makes it harder sometimes to get their attention. You know, if somebody puts a sit-in at their office, if we start marching in the streets in their district, that also gets their attention because that's messing with their votes and they don't want to see that bad press. So I think that until we can, as a society, put systemic pressure on them, like year in and year out, to say that why are we spending this money when these amongst us, mainly the poor, mainly the disenfranchised, the new immigrants, aren't getting resources that they need, while they keep a glutton of resources, in my humble opinion, going towards this defense industry. That's how we get their attention. I liked what Howard said about we're coming to a turning point. And I think things are really going to change. Nothing against our current leadership in Democrat Senate or the House, but all these folks up here in Washington, where I live, looking out my back window here at the U.S. Capitol, they're all in their late 70s. And I ain't got nothing against the old folks. I almost made an old man the president. I love old people. I'm talking about there's going to just be a dramatic change in our politics in the next 10 years, because 71% of school children in Texas are people of color. Like, it's just going to be a different. And these folks who are in power now are going to leave. And it's going to be up to us, and what Howard said about making a real big change pretty quickly. And it's going to be up to us, the people that are here, the ones of you that have been asking these smart questions, to actually make that determination on how that change happens.
I just say quickly, when I say New Haven, you say Rising and the Communist Party and our church all signed on to this ballot initiative that's happening in the state of Connecticut. And basically that shall Congress, you know, prepare for health and the things that we need, and actually having people pushing on election day to be raising the issue in real time. I'm proud of the party leading us all forward to actually make that happen. And we're on it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to this question before we go to the next one?
I agree with what everybody, all the panelists have said so far regarding this particular issue. Look, it's a matter of priorities. You know, it's a matter of priorities, you know, in terms of how do you cut military spending. And, you know, we have to put pressure on our representatives to make sure that, you know, our priorities is consistent with our movement. You know, it's about feeding the hungry. It's about jobs. It's about lifting up those who need to be lifted up. It's about, you know, it's about paying decent wages. It's about affordable health care. So, you know, I think that we decrease the military budget as we lift up the priorities that's going to save this country.
Thank you. CJ, the next question.
Okay, this next one is about a specific piece of legislation. So the Real ID law, which, you know, is about secure driver's licenses and state IDs, it requires a lot of documents to get one in a lot of states. Now, because of the coronavirus pandemic, it was pushed back. It doesn't come into effect until next year. But a lot of people are worried about how this will affect voter ID laws and whether that could be, a means of voter suppression. So the question is, do any of the people on the panel have strategies or experience developed around how to counter this use of real ID for voter suppression laws?
Thank you. You want to speak to that?
All I will say about the state government stuff and the ID stuff and the real ID is that there's going, under Barack Obama, who was a wonderful president, in my opinion, we lost 1,000 Democratic House seats in the state houses across America. We're slowly starting to rebuild that. And the reason I focus back on the state houses and these governors is because a lot of these state laws around state IDs are getting driven by those types of politicians, where obviously if you have a progressive governor, if you see what's going on in Minnesota, if you see what's going on in Georgia or others where there's not a progressive governor, you get different kind of laws that are, and I don't want to make it too pretty, but it just to keep people from voting, to be involved. I mean, they're doing it on purpose. Like they stole that election down in Georgia from Stacey Abrams because of what they did with the voter rolls. Like this is happening on purpose. And hopefully when we get rid of Donald Trump, we get rid of Trump-type Republicans and make that an evil thing, we can elect more people who have more vision to actually get this done where it's not a voter suppression, because I believe like you, there are. Now, what changes that? It's to Fred's point. It's people in the street, it's engagements, it's civil rights, it's working in the community to hold these politicians accountable around money or votes.
Anyone else want to speak to that on the panel?
I just think the organizations I know would unite here. We've had a real interest in citizenship and did a lot of training and had a lot of folks actually do that work. And that same type of work needs to be, we need to be creative in this moment, that based on what's happening with the ability for people to actually get documents and get things in play, how can we actually not leave people behind in this moment and sort of figure out expanding some of the things that we've done in the past to make sure in this moment that we have folks be able to have the right to the documents that they need to drive, to go to work and do the things to have the freedom that they need to live and thrive.
Yeah, the real ID is nothing more than voter suppression. In Montana this year, we had to fight a court case, a rule that had been passed that would have prevented anyone from picking up anyone else's ballot unless they could prove that they were a family member or that they had, a particular relationship. There was no way even to prove those things. We did win that case. So it continues now that, we can do ballot collection. And of course, that impacts low-income communities. That impacts, the mom that's working 2 jobs that doesn't have time to run the ballot down, or, that has to pack up, 3 kids in order to be able to go drop the ballot off, or, whatever. And so, yeah, we had that. We also had a case where the Republicans spent $100,000 to get a fake Green Party on the ballot. And then once accomplishing that, ran Republicans as the Green Party candidates. All that was intended to do was to slice off some Democratic votes in Montana. Are very close. So if you can snatch a couple percentage points, you can get a Republican into office. It's all awful. It's all voter suppression. It's all trying to steal the will of the people.
Yeah, I've never really considered, and really, because this is a good question. It has me thinking, the effects of the real ID. I know in Pennsylvania, I went to get one. They told me I needed an original Social Security card, which I don't think I've seen since I first got the thing about X number of years ago. Okay. So, I opted to, so I travel a lot, and I opted to just use my passport and get a regular ID because you have that option in Pennsylvania. But look, it's something to consider. I think voter suppression go beyond the real ID though, and the issue of the integrity of voting. and making voting more accessible to all Americans is something that, need to be a part of our agenda.
Agreed. Voting is a right.
Absolutely.
CJ, you
This
have another
next one-
question?
Yeah. So given the scale of the unemployment crisis right now and the number of jobless, a lot of voters are being motivated by the unemployment issue. How do we connect up the fight for an economic rescue package with Green New Deal and climate justice jobs? So looking to connect unemployment and the fight for Green New Deal jobs.
Okay.
Well, I think that that's a very heavy lift, because of the environment that we're in today with COVID. I think that the environmental legislation and New Green Deal is an important piece of legislation. I support the HEROES Act. I think that the HEROES Act should be voted on immediately. It should have been voted on months ago because it adds immediate relief. But to tie in a bill for immediate relief for people who suffer, be it unemployment or being loss of health care because they lost their jobs. But the things that the HEROES Act address is basically immediately COVID relief to Americans around this country who have been affected in one way or the other by this pandemic. And I think to tie that in to the new Green Deal, I think that would just being perfectly frank, I think that would be a heavy lift. I think that environmental legislation is going to have to be done in a separate bill, but there have to be the will to pass a new Green Deal or some sort of environmental legislation because it's so critical to saving our planet. But I think that to try to tie it in, even under a Democrat or Republican administration, I think will be a very, very tough struggle as long as COVID is around.
Speak to that. Seems to be kind of agreement on there. Yeah. Okay. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, CJ, maybe two.
Okay. This next one says, there's been a lot of talk so far about the response to intimidation and violence at the polls. Are any of the panelists involved in preparing the possible legal challenges that might be posed to the vote after they're cast?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Sandi, you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the.
Yeah, I mean, look, every international union have dispersed their attorneys, their legal departments to work within the work through the AFL-CIO's legal department, to be on standby and to work towards trying to get, make sure that we prepared legally in the event of lawsuits that's going to be coming up on election day. So I think that from speaking on behalf of the labor community, I think that all of our attorneys are involved nationally, okay, in terms of trying to have some coordination.
And definitely, I know we are from Unite Here, but also recruiting poll watchers and just as Fred has said, trying to pull it together and do that as much as we possibly can.
Great, thank you. What else is that? Okay, since that was a little bit of a short answer, we have one more, CJ.
Okay, we'll end it on a very positive, forward-looking
Good,
question.
we need it.
Okay, so this person asks, if we achieve our major goal, which is a decisive victory against Trump, and the Democrats end up controlling both houses of Congress after the election, what few demands would each panelist put forward in the days immediately after the election?
That's a good question.
Well, I'll speak and say that, in the Latino community, we've been talking about this. And I think the first thing we'll do is what President Joe Biden can do immediately when he's sworn in. And that is he can reverse all these anti-immigrant anti-people of color executive actions. Like we want him to immediately rescind the Muslim ban, rescind kicking kids off of DACA, rescind TPS. Like that's something a president can do immediately, which would be a hat tip to the Latino community. And then shut down all of these private prisons along our border where we have babies in cages is number 2. And then number 3, make it his job to fix what Donald Trump broke, which was to find these kids' parents, right? And find these babies and put them back together with their parents. Like that, this is, you know, we didn't break it, but we're going to have to fix a lot of things that Donald Trump broke.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if the election turned out the way that we want it to turn out, then I think that this president is going to have a very heavy lift. I think that Joe Biden is going to have a lot of work to do because so much, as Chuck stated, has been broken. If I had one thing that I could put forward on the table, I would like to see that the language pertaining to pre-clearance under the 1964 Civil Rights Act be restored. I think that it would be a good step towards dealing with voter suppression. If we had to, you know, if the pre-clearance language was put back into the Civil Rights Act, and that would be one of my priorities.
Reverend Marks?
No, I think that we should start, you know, building the document for the first 100 days, right? Because some of these things need to happen fast. And I think that, you know, I want to give, you know, all the sort of belief in, you know, what Joe's going to do. But I definitely don't want to have us have the belief also with the demand so that laws can be changed that can release people to organize and actually go after the quality of life and all of the dog whistles and policies and right to works and laws that are there. It's the larger the committee is, the more people that we have engaged and keep engaged. And Fred, I like that unity that we have built through this period. We got to hang on to it to really have the outcome that we need in order to move forward.
Absolutely.
Sandi?
I think that I can think of so many things. So I agree with the 100 days, but I'm not sure that there is anything that our country needs more on the first day than what Chuck talked about.
100, I agree with that. Definitely.
Howard, did you want to?
Well, I'll add in criminal justice reform up to and including the dreams of abolition.
Thank you. That was some great questions that came. Thank you to the attendees who sent in some really awesome questions to us as well. It's such a robust type of discussion we've had here tonight, especially looking at the stakes. And I want to give each of you a chance to kind of give some final words going into, I think we have a little bit less than 10 days to November 3rd. So give some final thoughts that you have. Let's start with Fred first.
Well, you know, first of all, thanks for hosting this panel. I want to thank everybody who was involved, and I want to, you know, just give a shout out to my fellow panelists. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this space with you tonight. Look, I for the next, I think we down to 9. I think the countdown is to 9 days. You know, I think we need to, you know, continue to make the phone calls, to knock on the doors, to, you know, make sure that we maximize the vote. What I hope for is to see a margin of victory that will really make it difficult for this president to steal this election. And I also want to encourage everybody to connect themselves to a voter protection effort, you know, that's going to be taking place. Hopefully those efforts will be coordinated because, look, you know, democracy is at stake. And I think we need to stay united. We need to stay vigilant. And we need to, you know, reclaim our country And then after we do that, then, we just have a lot of work to do. So, I just want to thank everybody for their time this evening.
Go to Howard.
Oh dear, I was just forming my thoughts. I guess I'll just agree with with Fred and yep.
Sandi.
Oops, let me get that mute button. Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure to have this discussion with the other panelists and with the attendees as well. And I thank People's World for making it possible. These are the kind of discussions we need to continue to have. I think that there is nothing more important to do with our time right now than to make sure that we're voting, make sure that every person we know is voting, make sure that, like Fred says, there's a lot of work to do in voter protection, in poll watching and observing as ballots are counted. And if you have the time to volunteer, do it, please. If there's not more help needed in your community, call the neighboring community, call until you find a slot, because it is our job. It's our job to take it over. It's our job to put it back right. Maybe it shouldn't have been, maybe it should have never gone this far, but here we are, and nobody's gonna do it but us. So please find your place in these next 9 days and give everything you have to make this next term look a little bit more like America's supposed to.
Yeah. Reverend Marks.
I guess the thing that I would say is pretty much what has been said. Basically, just going to vote won't be enough. You got to connect with your families. In the hardest hit communities, which we live in, basically this country, this electorate has not delivered to folks the things that they need in their lives. And there's a level of us that, thank God, we have the opportunity to have a decent job and trying to hold on to it in these times. But there is a level of the community, like we're talking to in North Philly, that basically really feel like politicians don't hear them and don't care about them, but basically trying to push beyond the norm that a voting is important, and the history of the struggles and the dogs and the ropes and the rivers that people got dumped into in order to have this right, but actually breaking it down to have a vision. It's not just about the third, but what are we going to do every day after to build our communities and continue to fight for the kind of change and the freedom that we need in our lives. And the thing that I say that we have to do is to make sure that we organize.
Thank you. And Chuck?
I'll say I want to start by thanking you. And I want to thank everybody behind the scenes who put this together, from the translators to my old friend Joe Henry, to all the panelists and my fellow panelists. I'm humbled to be here. I've been really, and I use the word fortunate, and I like to use the word intentional. I've been very fortunate to live the American dream. I never went to college. I've got a criminal record, and I was a single father at the age of 19. And I've got to experience and see the world, get to write a book, get to run a presidential campaign, get to live in this big fancy house in DC. I see my privilege, and I have gotten to live that, right? Starting in a factory when I was 19, building tires in Tyler, Texas. There's a lot of other kids out there like me today whose mom and dad are unemployed, who don't really know if they have a shot to make it, right? And I think that that's what this is all about. I think it's about finding a way to find our better selves and not let Donald Trump identify us by stoking up the hate inside of all of us, because I feel it. I know sometimes I get angry when I shouldn't get angry, and I act a certain way to Republicans and I shouldn't. I think that it's going to be a reflective moment to change this country after we beat Donald Trump and find our better selves, find our forgiving selves, find our hopeful selves, and teach our children and our grandchildren that Donald Trump wasn't a reflection of the values of who this country is, that we are, that our children are, and those two beautiful grandbabies behind me, my two Rocha boy twins. That's who this is about those little boys right there and somebody else's little boys and little girls. And that's why I'm happy to be here and what this is all about.
Thank you. And once again, we want to thank all the panelists and all the attendees who came out tonight to, like was said, we have like 9 days to a very monumental time. And I think what we can gather from this is that voting isn't just the process of the ballot itself, but the process of making our voices heard and listened to. The work, as we heard tonight, does not stop after the ballots are in, and that there will be continued work, and that we can't just check out once it's done, because there is still a fight there no matter who gets in there. And just to because I heard it tonight, it really just stuck with me what Chuck was saying about that it can't just be having a seat at the table. We have to run the meeting. The people have to run the meeting. It has to be the people's agenda. And that, I think, is what we can take from this voter town hall that we had tonight. And once again, thank you to all of the panelists. And if you want to know more about voting issues where you can poll at and things like that, you can go to peoplesworld.org. And, it's a daily news publication, award-winning publication. We've, grown in readership, and we're so grateful to all the people who check us out each day. And thank you to the panelists once again.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the panelists.
It was great.
Oh, and I meant to thank for the translation. Thank you, Jessica.
Great job, Chauncey. Thank you.
My cat. Oh, wait, are we still live on Facebook?
Your cat is
oh my
wants to be a
gosh.
star.
I know. These Hollywood cats, I tell you.
Right?
It's Hollywood
I
guys.
think it went well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, CJ. Good
Thanks,
job.
CJ.
All right,
Thank
good
you,
evening, everyone.
Carrie.
Thank you, Chauncey.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Reverend Marks. If you're still there, I see your name. Wonderful. Now I'm gonna go get some sleep, y'all. I'm tired. It's been a long
Okay.
day.
Okay.
Take care. Tomorrow, y'all.
Okay.